right. Good morning, Football Business Show, which is brought to you by the Football Foundation for Africa. In today's episode, we are going to continue on our governance series in collaboration with Sports Legal and our partner, APB Africa, Farmers for Leadership for UNICAF. On rights, about the internet. Charles, can you hear me?
Sorry? Okay, yes. Sorry, you were
Yeah, kindly
not audible at the time.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just saying I'm glad to be joined by two gentlemen, one from Kenya, one from Nigeria, and I would like you to go ahead and introduce yourself so that I don't butcher your name. We could start with you, Charles, by telling us your names, what you do, what your interest is and involvement is in football.
All right, my name is Charles Karega. I work in a corporate advisory firm in Kenya by the name Artemis Transition Partners, where I work as the managing director. Artemis Transition Partners it provides integrated advisory services across government, public sector, private sector, and non-profit organizations. As far as football goes, I don't play a lot of football now, but I played a lot more in the past. Played in the national junior team in Kenya many years ago in the 80s, and also played in National Division 1 thereafter. And soon after that, I pursued other interests that put a bigger distance between me and football, but I still play for sport and for leisure.
Thank you very much, Charles. I'm sure. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure we'll learn a lot from you. Over to you, Kelvin.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Kelvin.
Hello.
Kelvin Omojine. I am from Nigeria, proudly Nigerian, proudly African. Yeah, I am a sports lawyer, and currently my areas of interest and specialization, are in the areas of governance and administration. But I have delved into sports dispute resolution as well. I am a principal associate at Sport House LP. It's a boutique and virtual sports law firm. We operate out of Nigeria. And as for my involvement in football, apparently I've never been as good a player as Charles was. I didn't play for any national team, but for the past 6 years plus, I have been directly involved in football administration. I have had a regulatory and compliance role with the Nigeria Professional Football League and membership of the disciplinary committee of the Nigeria Football Federation. And also, I am the president of a new and small community football club, supporter-owned football club in Abuja, Abuja Metro Football Club.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. Wow, you guys, you've got quite the CV, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot from your experience and from your knowledge, both from the corporate world and even involvement in football. Today, we are going to be looking at national federation governance, especially in our continent, Africa. You must both agree with me, this is a very sensitive topic, but we'll go right ahead and delve into it. And to my first question, I'd like to know, what is good governance to you, and more so, how does it manifest itself in football or generally in sports organization? Kelvin, maybe you could start us off.
Okay, I'd start by talking about, okay, let's talk about governance, in itself. Governance essentially is the entire system in which or by which an organization operates or manages its affairs. And it's essentially the process of decision making and the process by which those decisions are implemented. And to me, I'd describe good governance then as a system that allows an organization to manage its affairs properly and make good decisions, and also to effectively implement those decisions. I wouldn't say it's enough to just say look at an organization and say, oh yes, this organization is good, or they have good governance. There has to be some objective means of measuring good governance, and that's where principles such as transparency, accountability, independence, having an effective system of dispute resolution, diversity, etc. That's where they come in. Then in the sporting context, good governance, to put it in practical terms, for instance, when you look at, since we're talking about football federations now, you look at a football federation, and then in terms of transparency, are their records public or published publicly? Are there reports available to the public, their financials, etc.? In terms of another indices, accountability, is there engagement with the stakeholders, or involvement of the stakeholder groups in their decision-making process? Independence, are the committees or the panels or the internal bodies within the federation, is there a significant level of independence, amongst the members of such internal bodies, or are they just there to do the bidding of the executive who put them there? Also, dispute resolution, is there an efficient system of resolving disputes internally, particularly through alternative dispute resolution means? And then you talk of something like diversity, whereas in maybe Europe, America, you'd be talking of LGBTQ community, racial and minority groups. Frankly, in Africa, across Africa, the laws are generally more conservative. So when we talk of diversity, we are talking less of sexual orientation. We're talking more of maybe gender and tribal representation, issues like is there an adequate number of women on the board, or are there representatives for the different stakeholder groups? Stuff like that.
Wow, that's quite comprehensive. Charles, what would you term as good governance?
Thank you very much. Frankly, I'm not sure I can make much of an improvement on what Kelvin has explained, because governance is really, as he's explained, the overall system that guides the exercise of power and decision making in the management and application of resources, specifically in pursuit of what would be assumed to be the values that unite a particular group of people. So such values would include, as he has also explained, inclusiveness, transparency, accountability, equity, respect, and other values unique to the particular group. Within sports management, therefore, this would entail, but not necessarily be limited to, the pattern. I prefer to call it the pattern of decisions, because sports would, governance or management of sport would go beyond the management of leagues, the management of federations or associations for that matter, the management of transfers and other laws that should not conflict with national constitutions or other local governance principles, laws, and other regulatory guidelines that may be issued by the government of the day. So the pattern here is important, because if you look at it from where it starts, and I think we might be dealing with this a little further on, the general values that unite a particular group of people set the tone for sport, for example, as they do indeed for anything else. So these values would include within sports the general understanding or appreciation of the sport in the national psyche, what role it plays and therefore how it should be managed, regulation governing sport, the funding of sports, allocation of available funds, management of sports organizations or associations, not just football, but all others, management of leagues, consideration for the welfare of players, and the overall sustainability of sports and sports-related institutions, really. That whole system or the pattern within which decisions that govern the activities of that space is what you would call governance in the context of sport.
And Charles, just to go a bit further, what do you feel are some of the challenges facing the governance of our football associations in Africa?
I think for me, the real challenge that comes that you can attribute or that you can find in the management of sport locally is leadership. All right, leadership, because if you think about there's an egg and chicken problem here. The biggest, if I retract that and say, the biggest perhaps is the lack of clarity of purpose, because not all constellations in the management of football in Africa are basically for the love of soccer. That's what Pele calls it in his book, The Love of Soccer. There's constellations for persons that are in sport for betting, for social mobilization, for political, to gain political mileage, for the management of revenues that come from advertising, player trading, endorsements, the profit, and indeed even self-enrichment. In other words, you wouldn't say that there is, in respect to the values that I just talked about, a clear purpose commonly agreed upon by the stakeholder or by the parties that are interested in the governance or management of sport in Africa. That therefore then leads to the perhaps what I was calling the egg and chicken problem, which is the leadership. Because then the question of who gets into leadership, sports leadership, and why. You see, of course, second after that is the matter of inadequate investment, both from governments, from private sector, even from within members of the respective associations and individual clubs. There's generally inadequate investment for a host of reasons. An interesting challenge, in my view, might also be poverty. All right. It is said that Winston Churchill said that football is a gentleman's game played by hooligans, and rugby is a hooligan's game played by gentlemen. All right. So, but generally, just the fact that the football is an item that you put together with old pieces of paper and tie them together. It doesn't need hoops to play. It doesn't need sticks or clubs. It's a very easy sport to play in even the poorest of neighborhoods. So what happens, in my view, is that the biggest constitution of persons that are interested in football are largely from what you might call not particularly affluent backgrounds. And that itself introduces a whole lot of challenges because it comes with, obviously, suppressed levels of education, easier ways by which persons in those communities are manipulated, competing interests that would put perhaps sport at a much higher level of interest than, at a much lower level of interest than other concerns that we may have, including food, accommodation, education, and others. And so when it comes to governance then of the sport, there's a lot of clutter around that, and if you find certain wealthy individuals or certain persons that are able to take leadership within those communities, not necessarily for their leadership or governing capabilities, but more for their ability to distinguish themselves on the poverty scale from within those communities, then they automatically obtain leadership, and which may not necessarily be because they want to advance football or because they have any particular contribution they want to make. So if you put all those together, lack of clarity of purpose, concerns around leadership, inadequate investment, and poverty, I think you get what, in my view, would be a fair picture of what really are the challenges of governance in Africa. And this is not exclusive to Africa. I think you find the same in South America and other not particularly developed countries, relative, of course, to what are probably formerly called first world countries.
Okay, that's very true. And just to join in with your first point on leadership, we know that dispute and wrangles are commonplace in African federations, especially over leadership positions and the opportunity to control finances and other resources, or even just for political clout. Kelvin, what do you think are the adverse outcomes that this brings, this dispute and wrangles, especially clamoring for leadership positions?
I would say the one clear adverse outcome is that it distracts from the actual process of governance. You know, the time and the resources that would have gone into managing the affairs of the federation, you know, as a lot of significant chunk is spent on battling opponents, real or perceived, or responding
Mm-hmm.
to queries, to investigations from government authorities, responding to court cases. So it takes a lot of time and resources, you know, distracting them from the actual, you know, governance. And we've had a number of cases where years down into the tenure, the people who are eventually are elected into these offices complain that these distractions prevent them from implementing what you know they had planned to do. So I think that is one clear outcome. And then even in the long term,
Mm-hmm.
what many people might not realize is that these wranglings, you know, the infighting, it has a system of or it results in a reduction of public trust or goodwill. You know, with accusations and counter accusations flying here and there, you know, members of the public tends to take sides and form opinions, even without knowing the true or the full details of the facts. You know, and over time, people just become
Yeah.
wary of the genuineness of these officials and even the entire federation.
And how do you feel how do you feel these disadvantages impact the long-term growth of football, especially in the continent?
Yeah, I
Kelvin.
think I think that I think that's that issue of public trust to a large
Yeah.
extent would answer that, because from our experience here, you find that many times even federations, leagues, you hear that they are talking to sponsors, but
Yeah.
sponsors are wary of committing, you know, to the federations because of what they read in the media about cases and investigations by maybe the Financial Crimes Commission and what have you. So it keeps these sponsors and partners who would have invested in the federation, it
Yeah.
keeps them back. So it has that drawback of reducing the potential for increased revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And
Uh,
then also
okay.
the public trust amongst fans, you know, that as well.
Mm-hmm. And what do you believe is behind these hardships, especially during the transition? The transition from one leadership to another one, or to trying to find a new leadership. What do you feel is behind these hardships in transition? And also, how would you advise the current leaders and future leaders who are going to come to change what you think is behind these hardships?
I think that these disputes that we see in football elections, I think they are a reflection of
Yeah.
what happens in a lot of the wider African society. You know, there's so much acrimony and fighting
Mm-hmm.
for positions of power. That's what I call it, not leadership, positions
Yeah.
of power. You know, because
Yes.
it is more of what
Wow.
these contestants, you know, get out of the office than what they will give to it. You know, politics is too lucrative. You know, I believe that people don't fight for leadership positions. What people fight for is power. You know, the power to control the
Mm-hmm.
resources. So if these
Yeah.
federations were not so heavily state funded, if the
Yeah.
leaders were had the task of actually producing the revenue, generating the revenue that the
Yeah.
federation would spend, you
Would
know,
need.
and then
Yeah.
accounting for it also.
Yeah.
I do not think we would see this extent of jostling for power, you know. And then and as as a suggestion, you know, in order to change this trend of acrimony due to election disputes, which slows down the governance process and distracts
Yes.
these officials from their work, I would
Mm-hmm.
recommend that football federations, have a change in their structure. That's my recommendation, a practical one. Have a change in the structure from this current format of board elections in favor of appointments. For instance, have a selection committee that would look for people with a specific skill set. The modern nature of football business requires technical expertise in areas such as business, management, administration, accounting, law, governance as well, So it only makes sense, for this federation to have a system of appointing people with these skill sets into their boards. Yeah, hello.
I think it's frozen.
Oh.
It's going to come back.
Hello, Chama. Okay. So I guess the show must go on. Hello, Chama.
I think, yeah. Okay. I think if when you come to the question of who gets into leadership, my feeling is that I think we're probably trying to turn around something that's already turned around so much, because the problem we're dealing with is a leadership problem, and that is why you would propose that you have people appointed who have specific skills. But we are also aware we've had the same problem, for example, even in religious organizations, where certain governments have required that pastors should have certain levels of education or certain levels of training in theology. And their argument is, what academic qualifications did Jesus Christ have? What academic qualifications did the prophets have? So I think it's really just about the leadership, really. And in my view, there has been as many successes from people that have not had good education as there have been from people that are of a fairly good level of education. So I'm not sure. Definitely, I would agree that the question of certain technical capabilities is important. But I wouldn't say that is really where the real problem is. The real problem is in the absence of a commitment to a purpose, to a sports-related purpose. All right, so that persons that want to go into leadership, with or without technical skills, are driven more by what you say is the desire to control, the desire for power, rather than the good of the sport in general terms. All right, and you really cannot set rules for good faith. You cannot legislate good faith. You just keep hoping that one day you'll get somebody who really is interested in sport. And I think, for me, it's not really a critical requirement that the persons that go into sports leadership should have any particular capabilities, because some of the people that have been most disappointing have been the best qualified in those areas, those that have embezzled federation money. Right.
Yes, I think I would agree with you, but then again, I think it's like a tripod, It's hydra headed, as someone would say. So because if fine, you could get someone without those skill sets who would do well, but if we left it all to having a good leader, you could have a good leader who would do well, and then his tenure is over. Then you have a bad leader who would undo all the good that the previous leader did. So I think we're really agreeing with you. More than anything, we should have a structure, a system where there is an effective, check on the leadership too. And of course, have a minimum threshold, at least, that guarantees or promotes, certain qualities. And such a person should have a track record too. I think that also would apply, in my opinion.
I'll just sit in for Chama a bit. I think he's had a technical difficulty, and continue with a question. Yeah, it is true. We need people with certain capabilities when it comes to the management of football to try and depoliticize more or less the running of the game and professionalize. I think one of the suggestions that is really made so that to get people who are actually interested in the game is to have more players in the management of football. What's your take, or former players in this case? What's your take on these, Charles? If I can continue with you.
I think to get to understand this better, there's a thin line that we have to draw between governance and politics. Politics is the pursuit of interests, with or without, even in the absence of governance. All right. And when there arises a competition of interests, even within players, then the process must inevitably become political. All right. So when you talk about constitutions in the clubs, or even federations or associations for that matter, those focus on governance. All right. But quite often then politics gets in the way. All right. So when you think about most federation systems of representative democracy, therefore, which is a way by which the political process is hopefully tamed, all right, as opposed to direct democracy, all right, where you would have as many people as are eligible to vote, voting. Football generally goes by representative democracy, where you have persons that ought to be believed to be representing interests of certain constituencies, majorly players, all right, perhaps even referees, all right, in some jurisdictions, contributing or putting in their vote on towards the leadership of the association, all right, and that's really the best that you can hope for. But the moment then that those representatives get into the political process, then interests very quickly take the day, all right? Because then you realize it's not just about governance, it's not just about the aspirations of those people you represent. A lot of times there is also a lot of influence to be peddled around, and the diversity or complexities of dealing with various stakeholders that the represented majority may not even be aware of. And so at the end of the day, while even players that start with good intentions from the grassroots, as it were, very quickly get swallowed in the political process, and even for the best of them, we probably end up with 40–50% of what they would otherwise give if they had a completely free hand on how to run leadership, or how to lead different football at different levels.
All right, thank you, Charles. Just to continue along your thought in terms of representation of stakeholders, and aligning that with Kevin's suggestions in terms of having a less politicized and more of appointment approach, and bringing stakeholders such as the government or the private sector in the running of football. How would this play out, Kelvin? How, for example, would this lead to a less political, less wrangles, less disputes within our federations?
As a part of I was in the course of my work in compliance, and governance. One of the things I've come across is when you are talking of the constitution or the composition of a board, it's or their operations anyway, it's important that the board is able to identify, stakeholder interests, stakeholder views, and then weigh them. So in setting up a board structure, it is possible that you have the different key or primary stakeholder groups represented on the board. So like I was saying, to something devoid of these wrangles from elections and all. If, for instance, the Football Federation chooses to maybe revisit its structure and have a corporate structure where the key stakeholder groups are identified, talking of football now, professional clubs, amateur clubs, players, match officials, or referees, at least this four, I'm sure everyone would agree on. And you say, okay, the board of the federation will be comprised of one or two representatives from each of these stakeholder groups. So it's left for these groups to have their system of nominating or appointing their representative onto the board. Given at their own level, they could also have these wranglings. But then the larger picture is that if, for instance, the players cannot agree on who will represent them on the board, it would not slow the board down. It would affect their own voice on the board. So I think a system of maybe having these stakeholder groups equally or equitably, depending on their relevance, represented on this board could help us get rid of some of all these wranglings that we see from the electoral system.
All right. Thank you, Kelvin. I'm sorry, guys, for dropping off. Internet issues. I did not abandon ship. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, I've heard about the structures you've been talking about. I just wanted to move on to some of the indicators of good governance you've spoken about. And one of them was transparency and communication. How do you think federations can improve on the same and ensure stakeholders are aware of the internal workings of the organization? That even people outside, like the different groups you've been saying that should be represented, how do you think the federations can improve on that? Kelvin, you can.
Oh, okay. Indeed, transparency, communication, they are among the indicators of good governance. And I think there are two angles to it, particularly when we use the word communication, it entails a back and forth, so that you give information and you get information back. So for a football federation to have transparency as part of their governance strategy, information about the federation needs to be out there, about their workings, their processes, their decisions. Like governance is all about decisions, decision making and all. So they should have a system of publishing, such information for the knowledge of stakeholder and reference of stakeholders and even the public. Primarily this is maybe through their websites or whatever.
Yeah.
Then for effective communication, there needs to be a way of that's where the back and forth really comes in. There needs to be a way of getting or hearing the voices of these stakeholders, which would in turn inform the decision of the board or of the federation, and this can be done through having stakeholder groups represented on the board or having members of the board, tasked with, sampling or getting the stakeholder views on whatever relevant subject. And, you could have a feedback mechanism also. These days, it's made easier through even social media and having emails, And I think in all of this, we must recognize that certain information are privileged or confidential. So in as much as, yes, we should have an open policy, we must understand that certain parts of this information, particularly related to individuals, might be confidential and have to be respected as such.
All right. You spoke about leaders not necessarily getting into those positions for leadership, but for power. Could you speak to the question of separation of powers and what makes most heads of a federation seem to hold all the power? Charles?
Myself? Hello?
Oh, okay. Myself? Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was saying.
I think, yes. You talked about separation of powers.
Yeah, about separation of power, and what do you feel makes most head of federations in Africa seem to hold all the power?
I think the democracy itself presupposes the abdication of certain rights and privileges or abrogation of those rights and privileges to the persons that you have appointed. You see, and that's why once you appoint say a member of parliament, you don't go to parliament yourself to represent your position, and you give him the mandate to represent you. So it is therefore to be believed that such leaders ought to have clear in their mind, or some way, definitely through some of what Kevin was talking about, of ensuring that they are representing not their own perspectives or their own wishes, but those of the people they represent. And so to that extent, there has to be some seeding of power that really snowballs as you go up, all right? Because if you do a grassroots election in a regional, for a regional association or branch of the association, you appoint one person who then represents what? 50, 60 clubs who will put sports friends, and somebody else sends 120, like that, to the point where you get, for arguments or for explanation's sake, the FIFA president, all right, or CECAFA president, who is the voice of football in the world, or in Africa, or wherever else, you see. So in that context, then there are two things that become a challenge. First of all, is that where the primary stakeholders themselves do not have recourse or influence, all right, within the system of governance, then the greater the power that is held by those people that they have appointed to represent them. You see, certain, if you go into politics, for example, national politics, for instance, there are certain systems of governance in some countries where increasingly now the electorate is requiring that they should be able to recall even members of parliament that they feel are not serving their interests. Now, I have yet to see that in football, all right? And I don't think it's coming soon.
Not.
Can I there's something that,
so the point is, if where there's no recourse, yes, Kel, go on.
Okay, sorry, there was a time lag. Okay, pardon me, I think there was a time lag, so maybe I didn't realize you were still speaking. I'm sorry. There's something Charles said that struck me, you know. Said we know where stakeholders do not have influence over the exercise of power by the federation or the head of the federation. And you know, there's something that I think, you know, speaks directly to federations in this sense. You know, it's you know, it's important to have a structure that promotes independence of you know, committees or internal bodies, you know, such as judicial bodies. You know, there are measures, for instance, you know, giving them, you know, fixed tenures, not just that they are appointed and can be removed willy-nilly by the chief executive or the head of the federation who puts them there. And then also there are means of funding. If you have a committee that the financial provisions are only periodically given to the committee, maybe after a particular task is done, it demotes their level of independence. But if they have a fixed direct source of funding, you know, based on a pre-approved budget, and I think such measures help to you know, promote the independence of these committees and these bodies, and of course enable delegation of powers and prevents the head from holding on to all the power.
Actually, Charles, I'd like to.
Yeah.
Actually, Charles, I'd just like to add on to his comment, and so that you can give us more on that. How do you also think that the federations can ensure the internal bodies stimulate, control, and inspire each other from the board to the management teams? Adding on to what Kelvin has said.
All right. Before I get to that, I think I'd just like to add on a little about the on the power and the amount of power that is controlled, right? So Kevin's view is quite correct, that, you know, if you have a committee or a board or an association that can be recalled by whoever at any time, all right, then it can also become disruptive to some extent, all right? But that must not also mean that, you know, for example, you have 4 years and you can do anything you want to do, and there's no internal mechanism of holding you to account, because you know you're protected and you have, you know, security of tenure for the duration of the association's time, all right? So the point I was making was that where you know that you have voted in somebody into office, and it is the system of governance does not have a way of influencing how that person will work, or of addressing the concerns that the electorate, if I can call it that for now, the concerns of the electorate, then the greater the power is held by those people that have been put to office. Now, when you come to the internal working of the association, all right, the smaller the number of representatives, all right, in a representative democracy, the greater the power the leader holds, all right? So that if you have a federation that's a council, for example, football council, where we have councils, where you have, say, 8 members, all right? With the leader being the 9th, or the chairman being the 9th, or the president being the 9th, he will be holding less power than that other council that will have 20 members and he be the 21st, if you see what I'm talking about. So that also, I think, speaks to the structure and the size of the council, all right? And particularly with respect to the amount of power that the leader of that federation or that association holds, all right? But to come back then to your, how they can motivate and inspire each other at different levels, I think the question of power must then be devolved, for lack of another word, all right, where we have national associations taking certain levels of decisions, and regional associations taking certain levels of decisions, and even local associations taking certain levels of decisions. Not all leagues must be, in my opinion, managed by the national association. You see, right? We have capabilities even at the lowest level of managing those leagues. Not all referees must be approved or commissioned by the national association, is what I'm talking about, right? That system of governance has worked in education, all right, has worked in healthcare. It should work in football, all right? But the more centralized all these operations then are to a national association, all right, that purports to manage even the smallest school league, all right, where those associations have their tentacles that far, then it becomes a huge, something that is difficult to manage, that is inaccessible, that is all powerful, and is ultimately non-effective.
Thank you very much for that extensive elaboration. I'd like us to move to governance models, and especially more so concerning the running of leagues and other competitions. Different countries, we know, operate different models. For example, in Nigeria, they constituted the league management company. In Kenya, we previously had the KPL, which was run by the club's ownerships, but now we'll have the federation run the league. So maybe you could both speak on your views on the different models and any suggestions to improve the said models. Maybe Kelvin, you can start with especially more on Nigerian model, and even in relation to the Kenyan one, or even any other models.
Okay. Charles said something that's vital here. That the leagues don't have to be regulated or administered by the national association. And indeed, when you talk about league governance models, there are a number across the world. But for this purpose, I think we could narrow it to two broad ones. I would describe as the independent league governance model and the stakeholder league governance model. So, like you said, okay, talked about KPL. That's essentially, I think, is the stakeholder league model, where the clubs that are participating in the league appoint one of their own or members from amongst themselves to run the league. Then the independent league governance model is the reverse, where you get people maybe nominated or appointed from outside the membership of those clubs, to regulate the league, Okay, let me add a third model, which is a hybrid of both, and which is essentially what the league management company is now in Nigeria. And you have where the chairman and at least half of the board members are appointed from outside the members of the clubs that make up the league, and they they constitute the board in addition to representatives from those clubs. And I think if you backtrack a bit, the initial idea behind the league management company was to have the independent model, and that came at the time when Nigeria was trying to implement the club licensing regulations.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
to promote, independence and in efficiency of the system, that's why they opted. Of course, there was some pressure from clubs who wanted to be involved, and that's why we opted for the hybrid model as we have today. And I think the model any league adopts, would depend largely on its domestic circumstances and what would work for it. Because what will work in a country in Africa might not work in another country in Africa, and what have you. There are examples of where these different models in US, independent model is working well for them. In England, the Premier League, the independent model is working fine. I think South Africa, they have the stakeholder system, and the PSL is doing fine. So it depends on the local circumstances, really, in my opinion.
PSL. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. And Charles, any views on the same?
Frankly, I could add much to what Kelvin has explained. The two models are the global models of managing league management, as you said, where you have the independent and the stakeholders. Nigeria, I think, is quite distinguished in that respect because they have what he has called a hybrid. In my view, I think which model succeeds where, in my view, is a reflection of a great deal of the national or the broader political context of the particular jurisdiction. Kenya, for example, currently previously had a stakeholder model, all right, and even before that, they had an independent. So we keep changing, right, depending on the broader politics of the what I call the political perspective, right, of the day, all right, which I think is generally a step, the climbing steps that we make, because by the time England, for instance, settled for the stakeholder model, they obviously had doubled with as many models with the models previously. All right, there are countries also equally successful that have the stakeholder model. I mean, the independent model that still also run successful leagues. But by and large, I think, as I said, from a governance point of view, associations and leagues are a microcosm of a bigger something, if you get what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So what is acceptable within the republic? What is acceptable within other political circles? What is accepted in national politics? What is because it carries the same perspective even in election of school boards, all right, or the character of governance of school boards, even primary schools, in the secondary schools, in university councils. So it shouldn't be expected that a football association will be too far from what generally the respective jurisdictions' approach to politics is.
Yeah. Thank you for your broad elaborations. I'd like to ask: Do you guys both feel that the football federations have a responsibility to the community, and if they do, how can they show that they care enough for the society that they operate in? We could start with you, Kelvin.
Yes, I think football it's a community sport, not just the volume of people who participate, the volume of followership. And there's no football without supporters, without fans, without spectators. So to just go straight to the point, I think yes, it's important that football federations engage in community and community engagement of some kind. And how they could do it, I think I'd just say take a cue from what a lot of the clubs are doing in England, particularly like the Premier League clubs, where they set up foundations, And it would really make a lot of sense if, no matter how small, a specific amount of their revenue is earmarked for such community purposes, and then have a foundation, get people, experts in social work, charity work to run it.
Charles, any differing view, anything to add on?
No. I think so football is indeed a community sport, and if you look at its ability to mobilize, particularly the youth, to communicate messaging of varied nature, I think it's something that every government of the day and every community needs to be sensitively aware of. What is surprising really is a mandate that is typically given to, if I talk about Kenya, and I think I would know about Kenya the most, to the sports and culture ministries, right? There is a huge mandate that they have, right? So it is not for lack of understanding of the value of sport, right? But I think there's a gap between the love of sport, all right, and politics, you see, because the moment that you bring in, say, the national federation, for example, that will also be funded by the state, well, it is the state that determines how much it will fund such federation, all right. There is the question of independence that has been fought over the years to date, including even the inclusion of including the independence of FIFA itself, all right, in the global political arena, all right. So even national associations have to really struggle for their own independence, particularly when we go back to the matter of underfunding, all right, or underinvestment. And if when the government is your biggest financier, then you have a problem really, because there's only so much you can go off the general government course, right? That does not, that only adds to the fact that a lot of governments in Africa don't have as much money as as probably they would want to invest in sport, and not just football. You see, we have huge concerns around healthcare and education and defense in some cases, and which generally leaves not very much for sport, and then it has to be grabbed, across all sporting interests. So there is an interest, I am persuaded, but there's just a gap that creeps in from a political dimension, as well then from a funding dimension. Because if you look at, for instance, the earnings of certain, say, clubs that are listed on the stock exchange, you will find that ticket sales, for instance, contribute up to, in some cases, 45% of their revenue. You see, in some restrictions. All right. Now here, I don't think even the leading clubs can survive on ticket sales. You see, because there's just not much money to be accrued from ticket sales. You see, so a lot of teams will still depend on well-wishers, on sponsorships that are also not very big. And in between there, then everybody is really, in my opinion, doing the best they can.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Time is far much spent. There's a lot to talk on this topic on governance, but it would be only fair that we should fill some questions from our audience, because we could keep going on and on and on, but some audience interaction would be good. So let me check some of the questions we have here. We have a gentleman by the name Patrick Gatere who's asking, can ethics trump governance? Kelvin, maybe you can take this question and maybe just expound more on the role of ethics. What is ethics, and can ethics trump governance?
I like the question. I like the way this put. Ethics. When we talk of ethics, I think it's easy to say morals. The moral standards. By which a person should behave, standard of behavior. And in football, we talk a lot about ethics. Integrity. These are words that are common. Whether ethics can trump governance? Yes, surely. Even someone who is ethically upright or astute, would not need regulations, to do the right thing. But the challenge there would be, since organizations, you have to look towards sustainability. So I think I mentioned earlier, you could have somebody who is good today and tomorrow have someone who's bad. So that you want the good to be sustained. That's why regulations and all are important. So ethics, yes, can trump governance, but in the long term, it might not be sustainable.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see we have another question from Kathy Kamau, and she's asking, is there a possibility, hypothetically, for the African football enterprise to develop its own governance model that is not necessarily a part of what is predominantly, in quotes, global north? Maybe Charles, you can take this one.
I think that takes us back to the two models that Kelvin alluded to earlier. That is the stakeholder model and the independent model. All right. The same models have also been called independent model and association model. All right. Different meanings in some contexts, but basically what the models, if I just go back on that a bit, mean is that when you're part of an association, within the association model, then the entire structure of football governance is guided by the principles of that association, all right? And the association, the National Association, issues very clear guidelines on how everything will be done right to the bottom. All right. When you are in the stakeholder model, all right, that becomes a little different, because then the National Federation is part of a bigger, say, the board or a bigger group of people or stakeholders, and is not in principle the absolute regulator of football in that jurisdiction. In the latter, I think it will be possible, because then if such governance of sport can then be relegated to different levels, then those different levels, like it happens in every other such devolved responsibility, can come up with their own governance models. Of course, well guided by globally acceptable principles, which I think right at the beginning we talked about: transparency, accountability, and others, which would not necessarily be expected of even the national association, if you get what I'm talking about, because then everybody is running their club or their association or their league the way they best know how, at their level, within the broader principles that the national association or federation desires that sport, and the government, of course, desire that the sport is run. And in terms of regulation and the statutes by which such sport will be run, I don't think the government or the national federation or association would have adversarial principles of governance. All right, they would all be very broadly aspirational, good in principle. All right, but the problem with governance then comes in with the devil is in the detail, really, in governance. You see, the devil is in the detail. For instance, what happens with ticket sales in a village that actually manages to collect the money, you see, and which money is not expected to be taken to the federation. See, who mans the gates, for example, in that village, you see. So that village would be able to make its own system of governance of managing leagues, and I've seen that happening here in what you can call independent leagues in Kenya, where there's some that are phenomenally well run, all right, and others that run for a short time because they're phenomenally badly run, all right. So where you have more stakeholders involved, and the national federation or the governance system of sport is letting authority and allows sport to be managed differently at different. I think indeed it is possible to come up with independent governance models. Whether such a model can then be harmonized and consolidated into a national model, I have my doubts. I think it is best at that level.
Thank you very much for that. The last one is a comment from a gentleman by the name Collins Marita, and he says, former players getting into leadership positions, and with the experience they have as players, you'd think they do things differently, but it's still the same old. That's an interesting comment from Collins. And gentlemen, it's already been an hour since we started.
If I just interject on that, I think that's exactly what I said. Anybody that appoints a former player, all right, is appointing somebody that hopes will represent their interests. You see?
Exactly.
But I can tell you that a lot of even smaller former players and grassroots interested parties have no idea what goes on in national sports politics, and it becomes very complicated to the point that even players with the best intentions, as I said, give us 40-50%.
Gentlemen, it's been you've brought up a lot of points for people to continue the conversation, and there's still a lot more we could have discussed, but it's already been an hour, and time really flies. You know, before we started, I thought maybe an hour was more than enough, but clearly there's a lot more to discuss on this matter. But maybe I'll give you a chance, both of you gentlemen, to give us some closing remarks. Maybe it's a word of advice to current and future leaders. And also, if you're on any social media pages, you can give us your handle so that we could chat with you further on this topic and any other in relation to football. We could start with you, Kelvin.
Yes. I'd like to say, ordinarily like to say, okay, what I think about maybe the future for governance in Africa, but I stopped looking into the crystal ball when nobody on the whole planet predicted COVID-19 and the impact. So I think what really matters is, as we go on, try to improve and also be dynamic. For instance, lots and lots of people who were, as we would say here, analog, who were averse to maybe having online meetings and all, had to do all of that when COVID pandemic struck. So we just need to be dynamic and look at the domestic circumstances, look at the regulations, what you can do within it to improve. I think consistent improvement is what really, really matters for us. And for social media, I am at KCJINE, across all social media platforms.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. And Charles, any final remarks?
There's a very good movie that's called The Love of the Game. It's about baseball, but I think it's a good movie to watch. It's all about love of the game. It's quite interesting.
Love of the game.
Romantic drama, all right? And one of the greatest footballers, Pele, has also written a children's book that's called For the Love of Football. And in it, he explains what he has learned in football and how football has changed his life and the places in the world it took him. And it's an interesting read as well. I think what I would say is really, let's just get into it for the love of the sport, for the love of the game, right? Love of the game. A lot of football is ruined by people that come into it for different interests. Where I've come from and how I've grown, you picked up a ball and just went to play, all right? Many times it didn't matter who won, you see? It didn't matter who the referee was, so long as they were fair. It didn't matter many things. You complemented one another and you are happy just playing the sport every single day, right? You didn't fight, you didn't hit people with stones, and you didn't bribe, to get into a position. You actually stood in a line and you're picked out. I think all of us who played football have been party to that. Even Kelvin, you said you didn't play much football, but I'm sure you played that level. Where you stood in a line and somebody said, I want Charles, I want Kelvin, and you went a team in turns. So I think the more that can be done simply just for the love of the sport, all right, really the better. And I think let's just know that if you're in leadership, that we are accountable to those whose futures particularly and whose quality of life we so much influence.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Charles. That was a good summary and of why we are all here. Love of the game.
Yeah.
Nothing else brings us here. And Kelvin also on just reminding us what COVID has told us. Dynamism, just being ready to change with the times and keep moving. One final comment here from Dev Kumar Parmar. I hope I have not butchered your name. And he says, brilliant session, all. Congratulations to the panel moderator, and as always, the FFA, Football Foundation of Africa. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. And I'd also like to thank our collaborators on this governance series, Sports Legal. I'd also like to thank our partners, UNICAF, there's also Parma's Football, there's also OTB Africa, and CBeyond Leadership Forum that have all made this possible for us to meet online and continue this conversation. And for everyone else, we thank you even for tuning in. Thank you for giving of your time. We know people are busy nowadays with very many different things. Thank you for giving us an hour of your day. And we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye, and have a good night. Have a good rest of your day, wherever you're watching us from. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Thank you.